And so one of our questions is from Rachel. And Rachel said, what is your best piece of advice for a mom about to file for divorce and best advice while going through the divorce process? So some of the context is she was married almost 4 years, no children together, but have a 6-year-old that I brought into the marriage, no job as I was recently laid off. And the reason for the divorce is abuse, was physical early on, but that has stopped. And now it's more emotional, mental, and verbal. And he doesn't see his need to change. Thank you so much. The best piece of advice for a mom who's about to file for divorce, one of the things that's really important, I think what people have to understand, and I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna always say this: divorce is a life-altering event. You have to treat it that way. Okay. It doesn't mean that it's the end of your life, but it is an end of a very crucial part of your life, if that makes sense. Divorce is very equivalent to death. And what's important is to prepare, to see what this is going, where you are and what this is going to look like and how are you going to move forward. You need to assemble a team, and I always tell people you have your top 4 advisors. I call them advisors. You might need a lawyer. Lawyers you may not always need, but you might, depending on what needs to be split, what needs to be divided, whether or not if there's a level of people, if both people can be amicable, right? Because then if you can't do it uncontested, then that goes into a whole different situation. And so I would say, get a consultation to really see what this looks like, if that's necessary in regards to a lawyer. Another person on your team that you need is a financial planner. I know that you lost your job. I would say the very first thing is to find another one. Income is very crucial for you. Why? Because you can find yourself attempting to stay in a relationship or in a marriage all because you feel financially in bondage. And I've seen where many people stay for that reason only. And I'm not here to judge it because I absolutely understand it. But you never want somebody to have control over you all because you need their financial income. Okay. And so the goal, I would definitely say, is definitely get a job and get it quick. But in getting a job and getting it quick, don't just settle for any pay. I understand we have to do what we have to do, but this is where you have to know your worth in the marketplace. That's extremely important. Another thing I'm going to say is that if you are on his insurance, get you a therapist, get you a coach, get you both. Or put yourself in the form of a support group. Why? Because you're going to need a support group that's going to help you through this time. You mentioned that there was some physical abuse early on that eventually turned into mental, emotional, and all those things. That's residue. I don't know if you was on the very first call that we had on Monday. And one of the things that I mentioned is you got to see how this leaves you, meaning that what residue has been left on you since the dissolving of the relationship. Because remember, I said many of us dissolve, few detach. So the physical abuse, the mental abuse, the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, listen to what I'm saying, that's all domestic violence. See, people think it's just a physical act. No, emotional abuse is domestic violence. Verbal and emotional abuse is domestic violence. Financial abuse is domestic violence. Spiritual abuse is domestic violence. And so when you've been in a dynamic that involved abuse, you have to unlearn a lot of things about yourself because of the abuse that was done within the relationship. Maybe a lot of manipulation, control, gaslighting, all these types of things that unconsciously stays with you. And so you need a coach or a therapist or both. I've had a lot of my clients had therapists too. Okay, so on top of having a therapist, they also had a coach, and that was extremely important for them. Another one is what you're going to need is, I would say this: be mindful of who you confide in. So if you have a trusted friend that really wants your best interest, then let them be a trusted source. Now, here's the thing: they're not your therapist, though. They're not your coach. They're your friend, right? Meaning that you want somebody who is non-judgmental to your situation. You want someone who is empathetic and who is kind. And it might be that one friend. And I think that's really important because we need friends, right? But we don't have to, we got to know what our friends are good for in specific times, right? Because sometimes we have friends, they're good people, but they just may not be the best people to trust in what it is that we're going through. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, is this a friend that I know wouldn't judge me? Because here's the thing, it seems based upon what you said, because you was like, he doesn't see his need to change. And so it's important to understand that you don't have that power. It's really important to know that there's nothing you can do for them to change. It's like this. When you all are on this call, you're coming for you. Remember, I said this earlier this week. This is more about you and less of your ex. And I say that because your ex has to do their work. Your spouse, they have to do their work. You have to do your work. And so I think the hardest part, and I talked about this on day 2, acceptance. Remember, I talked about acceptance. This is a part of getting to that level of acceptance of saying this person may not ever change. And whether if they do or they don't, the question is, how long are you willing to wait? How much time are you willing to give it? And is it worth it? And that's very important. So, what I'm getting around, and I'm not 100% sure, that you might be in some level of uncertainty on whether or not if you want to go back. But when we did the work on day 1, I told you all to list 5 reasons on why you can't. You need to go back and keep reading them. They need to be very crucial. They need to be extremely critical, meaning that you can't go back because that screams danger. You have a 6-year-old. You got to think about what your 6-year-old is being exposed to. A child's development at this age is very crucial, and they won't forget. So we have to be mindful of those things. Okay. Also, Rachel, I actually did a podcast on your top advisors, podcast episode 116, assembling the right team during your divorce or your breakup. The top 4 advisors that you need. Episode 116, I recommend listening to that. So I do hope that brought you some clarity to your question, Rachel.